everyone, and this is Andy Karuza with NachoNacho, and today we have Derek Osgood with Ignition, and we're going to go over some great go-to-market tips for any company, especially those startups out there building the next generation of great products. So without further ado, I'd love to hear from Derek and learn more about what Ignition does.
Hey, Andy. Yeah, pumped to be here. Excited to chat. Yeah, I mean, the super quick version on what Ignition does, we're basically a platform that helps to manage the go-to-market process for product teams and product marketing teams. So, we help launch stuff. So upfront, we have a bunch of research tools that help collect the research, both competitive and customer, that feeds into planning. Then we have some planning tools that help the product team to prioritize a roadmap, hand off into a go-to-market planning motion for the go-to-market teams. And then, underlying all of that, we have a lot of communication and enablement tools that help keep all those teams on the same page, get information and context to the teams at the places that they need it. And then, post-launch, help you actually measure the impact.
Always important.
Yeah.
So tell me more about your career. How'd you get to where you're at now, helping companies with their go-to-market strategy and building a whole platform around this?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I've run kind of marketing and product teams throughout the Valley. So, early on in my career as a PM at PlayStation, launching big AAA games. And then I've basically been around venture-backed startups ever since, did a lot of early stage stuff, running marketing and growth teams. And then ended up joining BBVA, which is a big Spanish bank that most people haven't heard of, to help them run marketing across a portfolio of companies that we had created and incubated in-house. In their innovation arm. And then, most recently I was at Rippling, helped them stand up, product marketing and scale up from seed through Series B. And so, I've been through a lot of go-to-market processes, all shapes and sizes at big companies, small companies, brand new companies that are launching their own company. And, I basically just experienced a lot of personal pain around building these processes out and seeing all the breakpoints that happen, within the organization. And so, decided to go out and solve the problem.
Yeah, it's a constant problem. I've been around startups for a long time, and nailing that go-to-market and getting that established product market fit is probably one of the hardest things you can do. But once you have that, then at least you got a better direction to where you're going. So I guess with that in mind, what are some good go-to-market strategies that every company should consider? If you had a list of your top three, what should people consider there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the important thing to distinguish here is the difference between company level go-to-market strategy and how are you actually selling your product and selling your company, which is macro level pricing, packaging, positioning, et cetera. And then go to market, which is kind of the element that we help with more, which is micro level go to market. How do you actually go about launching things? And so, I think when I think about, kind of the top three things that are important to keep in mind when it comes to, the go-to-market motion and how you're launching stuff. Mostly, one is, be multi-channel. Too many companies, they kind of rely on just, we're going to send an email to customers to announce this thing. And that's all we're going to do. And they never get the adoption that they want on the thing that they ship because, customers they miss the email, they never get a follow-up on it. They only see the one email and it doesn't seem important because it's not actually landing across multiple different channels. So,
Did you get the memo?
Yeah, exactly. It's people just don't get the memo and then they don't end up adopting the thing that you built and you spend a lot of time and effort to invest in shipping. So I think, being multi-channel is really important. I think, the other ones are actually having a concerted kind of planning motion. I think a lot of companies forget that their internal teams are arguably their best marketing channel, and making use of, all the folks in the company and making sure that they're all telling a consistent story, that they're all active in promoting the thing, all that just comes down to you actually having communicated effectively internally, done a plan, gone through the planning process to identify the right messaging. And then, the third one is probably just making sure that you are actually informing that process with research. Too often companies, they're just kind of shipping a thing based off gut feel and they haven't actually done any competitive research. They haven't, talked to customers. And so, I think that component is critical as well.
Yeah, a lot of people like to go to their go-to. Maybe they've done Facebook ads for a consumer product before, and now they're launching a B2B company, and might not be as effective as maybe say LinkedIn ads or having a good email list of prospects built up in advance. And to your point, some of the best advocates are your early team members or partners, investors even, and the company can be, great channels to kind of get the word out there about it. We have a saying at NachoNacho, we like to be everywhere all the time. So, to your point about multi-channel, it's definitely important. People, if they see you on social media, they get an email. Heck, you're even texting your close partners and friends about your company launch and everything. That's really has a profound difference in the level of importance people apply to it. I guess with that in mind, what do you see people do? How do you see people screwing up their go-to-market strategy the most? Like, what are the most common pitfalls that startup founders should avoid?
I mean, the number one is that they just don't do any planning. Like they're just kind of throwing stuff against the wall and like hoping that it sticks. And they're like so focused on getting things out the door and like so focused on the execution side of things that they don't actually like be thoughtful about, what their positioning is, what their messaging is, like what audience they're really targeting. And so the number one thing, that I think companies get wrong is just that they're too focused on like moving fast and doing things. And like, look, we as a company, like we very much prioritize speed internally ourselves. And like, we are very much a, move fast and like constantly be shipping culture. But on top of that, like we're very thoughtful about like why and how, and, how we're going to message those things that we're building. And, I think like too often founders get caught up in the, like, I'm going to ship a bunch of stuff and like, some of it will stick and I'll just figure it out later. And like, you never figure it out later because you never had a hypothesis that you were even testing up front.
Yeah, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. It's a lame, tried but true term, but it definitely has meaning to it. So, what are your thoughts on like paid advertising? Is that part of the mix, or would you recommend that companies really try to stick the organic efforts first, and then they could look to scale with advertising afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, like when it comes to like channel selection, so I'm a big believer that like any channel works for any company. There's no like better channels or worse channels, and there's no like right channel for your company versus wrong channel for your company. Like as long as you're creative about how you approach any channel, you can make it work. But I think the thing when it comes to paid versus organic is like oftentimes it's just a timing question. It's like, how quickly are you trying to ramp? Paid like becomes a bit of a drug and you get addicted to it. Like if you end up spending a lot of money on and like all your acquisition is coming through paid channels, it's hard to move off of that, like when you start having more and more aggressive revenue targets. So that's the only big downside to it. But paid can work great when it comes to like quickly ramping acquisition, early on. And, I think like too many companies are afraid of like ever using paid because they've been told so much that like paid is bad. But the reality is like, if you go and you just are investing a ton in content, for example, like that content takes a long time to scale. And like, if you want to create that content and get it actually distributed and published and get people's eyeballs on it, sometimes you have to invest in paid in order to get distribution on it.
That's a great point. A lot of times people don't look at the trade-offs there with, all the time and money they put into say content marketing, and then they don't scale it and get it out there for people to actually consume the content, use it.
Yep. Yeah, it's like, people think like, oh, because it's organic and because I'm not paying money for the distribution on it, it's free, but it's not. You're spending a lot of time and energy on it. And if it ramps too slowly, it still has the same impact of you burning money on an ad during that period.
Yeah, totally true. And it just sits there. If a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, did it ever happen? So what tips would you offer for optimizing an advertising campaign? Say if you did want to go through the paid channels, how would you, what would you recommend for startup founders to kind of dip their toes without, overextending themselves and wasting a bunch of money on ad budget before they figure out what works?
Yeah, I mean, like the number one thing is just start small and gradually ramp. I mean, there's generally a rule of thumb that like, once you find something that's working at the conversion rate that like you need it to be working at and it's like performing efficiently is like, never do more than like doubling your ad spend in a given like week, for example. It's like gradually kind of gradually, incrementally increase spend over time. And, but the most important thing when it comes to ads is like, it used to be a world where there were a lot of different targeting parameters that you could dial the knobs on and, end up getting outsized performance. A lot of the paid ad channels, they've kind of started hammering out those, targeting parameter, options. And it's now like, you kind of just dump your creative into the system and the system optimizes everything. And so like the much more important thing for you to really focus on optimizing when you're building out, paid campaigns is your messaging and like, what are you saying? And like, what creative are you using? And so you really should be doing like multivariate testing a bunch of different, like find a couple of core messages that you think are going to resonate with those customers based on the conversations that you've had with them, and get to, a one ad that's performing really well first based on a specific message, then start gradually layering in, additional versions of that over time. But, the biggest thing is just test messaging first and foremost.
And messaging in the offer there. But I guess, do you have any examples of some companies possibly that you guys worked with that really nailed their go-to-market strategy? And, what did you learn from those campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, like we don't pay as much attention to like our customers' specific like go-to-market plans because like obviously it's private information, and so But I think when I look at companies that are that I really respect in terms of the way that they've like grown their companies, I think there's companies like Miro has done a killer job with like building out community. I think they leveraged a significant amount of like user generated content to create all of their template libraries that end up feeding their PLG onboarding, and I think they're like one of the gold standards when it comes to like content marketing and like publishing, like really useful content that drives, folks into the platform, and then their onboarding is just super slick. But I mean, there's a lot of companies that I could point to like specific tactical things that they've done. Kind of blanking on a couple of them right now, but
what about like Product Hunt, for instance, for like early stage companies to kind of get out there and get some initial customers going?
I think Product Hunt's funny. I mean, like we've used Product Hunt, a fair amount ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. And like part of that is, just purely just to walk the walk around like the importance of launching things for us from a branding perspective. But I think Product Hunt, like it used to be a better channel than it is now when it comes to like user acquisition. It's always been kind of like a bit overrated as a user acquisition channel. Partly because like if you look at the audience of Product Hunt, basically it mostly is other founders and it's like product managers. And so if you're targeting one of those two audiences, Product Hunt's great. Yeah. But if you're not targeting one of those two audiences, Product Hunt really like it's good for getting, kind of some social proof, and you get some early reviews. And like there are people who like giving feedback on products. So it's good for getting like broader UX teardowns, but you're not going to get a lot of like users who fall within your audience, unless you're targeting like a very niche set of people.
That's a great point, actually, because your audience might be entirely different than what they have on there. So by bringing a product to market there, you might get some initial excitement about the product and some great feedback, like you mentioned. But they might not be your ideal customer profile that actually sticks around and is a long-term customer, which is ultimately how you build a business.
Yeah, and I make the joke pretty often that like Product Hunt, you're launching to other people who are launching on Product Hunt like pretty soon. It's like most of the people who pay attention to Product Hunt these days, I think, are people who have their own launch that they're planning on Product Hunt in the near future, and they're basically trying to like drum up interest from people who recently launched.
That's what I said that. Yeah, it's like getting a bunch of sales people together in a room for a party. Oh, what do you do? Well, let me tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. What other tips do you have for companies to bring their say SaaS product to market and identify some good go-to-market strategy there and then scale from there?
I mean, I think like it's pretty important. A lot of companies, especially early on, they really underutilize the concept of like, beta programs and like being able to do more contained releases to smaller subsets of their audience. And so, like this is a very common practice in like the mobile app world where, like if you're talking about scaled mobile apps, for example, they'll launch, their new version of their app or their new product in a specific geography. Like it used to be, kind of old hat. They would launch in like the Philippines, and they would launch the first version in the Philippines, get a lot of feedback on it, and then go do the bigger launch, later into the broader, world. And so I think companies on the whole, like, don't make use of soft launches enough, and like quietly shipping something to a contained group of users and doing like kind of a 2-tiered launch process where you announce first to that beta group, and then you announce later to your broader, set of customers and like the broader universe. So, and there's ways that you can structure that make it dramatically more effective too. So like if you can actually create a formal beta program where customers opt into it, and when they opt into it, they can even sign an NDA if you want it to be quiet, if you want it to be like a stealth beta program. But when they opt into it, they feel like they're part of you can make them feel like they're part of a special community, and they're getting like early access to these things, and it makes their feedback feel dramatically more important. They just, are way, way more likely to become advocates for you down the road. So, like using beta programs is probably one of the number one things that I think companies should do more of.
That's a great point. Yeah, because sometimes people want to launch too broadly, and they might not even have good product market fit. Doing the soft launch gives you the ability to actually make mistakes and learn from them. So it could be, maybe you have to tweak your messaging, maybe find a certain ad campaign or messaging resonates better. Maybe you figure out that you have some key features that are missing. So why waste the time and skill and effort, money to go to a broader audience if it's not going to stick?
Yeah, exactly.
Great. What are some new marketing trends that are underutilized, do you think, that some tactics that companies could take advantage of?
I mean, I think like, especially when you're talking about B2B, it's not really that new at this point, but, I think companies, especially in B2B, tend to be slower at picking up, new platforms. And like TikTok's great. I think it's an area that we don't actually use it ourselves, but I've talked to a lot of companies that, I'm advising that they're finding a lot of success on, using TikTok as a channel. I think, part of the benefit of it is obviously you don't need a really large audience in order to, instantly get fairly significant distribution. So as long as your content's, good and useful. And I think a lot of people are very like hesitant in B2B to think about like social channels as a viable distribution channel, because they're so like, they feel like it's a consumer thing, but those people who are consumers are still your customers. And so reaching them on, a channel that's like a consumer channel is still viable.
Yeah, I totally say the same thing. I mean, the same people that are on LinkedIn also will spend time on the social networks as well. And what we've done recently is we jumped into TikTok as well for these webinars. Actually, we'll chop up a lot of great content for it, throw it on TikTok, and I'm amazed with the amount of views that we're getting actually, because I think there's a high demand for B2B content, but not a lot of people providing that B2B content. So this high demand, low supply, which is a great place.
Exactly.
Great. Any other channels that people should be aware of?
I mean, from a channel perspective, I don't know that there's any others that I would really, recommend off the top of my head. I think, like from a trend perspective, obviously like companies, more and more are trying to, start leveraging AI. So, I think there's a lot of ways that can be applied within marketing. Obviously there's content creation. But, I think companies are also like sort of underutilizing the ability to use AI to, extract insights from their large quantities of qualitative data. So, I think that's becoming more and more common as people get more kind of familiar with using tools like ChatGPT, but, and also as more dedicated tools pop up around it. But yeah, that's probably the other big one that I would flag these days.
Yeah, I've also seen a lot of people, I just got a calendar notification too. I've seen a lot of people actually over-rely on AI tools as well. So the opposite side of it, either they're not using it or they're using it too much, where they're just trying to, cut costs, of course, and they're just generating whatever image AI comes up with, and they're using that. So they're losing that quality aspect, you know what I mean?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's definitely like, it's a double-edged sword, and it's a great tool, especially when it comes to like long tail, less complicated content. Like, for example, I think using AI for generating like Google ads is great, because you can basically just create a huge long tail of ad creative that you otherwise probably wouldn't be able to ever generate yourself. But, when it comes to like, you don't want to generate a landing page or you don't want to generate a blog post with it because it's just not going to be effective at communicating the value of the thing that you're building. So, I think like you can't over rely on it, but it is a powerful tool, like when used, in a much more focused fashion.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I guess failure comes with any profession. Can you tell us about a time you failed and what did you learn from it?
Oh man. I've got, a lot of times, I think that's, like you said.
That's why I love this question. Like, they're the best stories usually.
Yeah. I think one that comes to mind, this is like kind of just more of a funny tactical story. I think like when I was launching a game called Beyond back at PlayStation, we had a campaign that we created that was basically, all about like we were partnering with Ellen Page, who was, at the time an actor that was, starring in the game, and basically we didn't realize that she was really, really a massive environmental advocate, and we ended up doing a campaign where we basically were like shipping, a bunch of blank paper to journalists to promote the fact that like, the game had a script that was like 10 times the size of, of a movie script, because the game, like the whole positioning was around it being a cinematic, storytelling experience. And one of the journalists, like happened to like at the Wall Street Journal ended up having to write a piece about like our marketing campaign, and basically like, we didn't realize that it was landing on Earth Day. And so we had this whole explosion of like, things almost like the whole campaign almost unraveling. And, it was a great teaching moment for me, because it taught me like, again, the importance of like really concertedly like thinking through and planning the launches and campaigns that you are shipping, because there are so many potential stumbling blocks that you can fall into. And like that could, that's an extreme example, but you can also fall into, like accidentally doing a launch on a day that a conference is happening that your audience is like all going to be tuned into. You don't want to be competing against Apple dropping, WWDC, and you just didn't pay attention to the date. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You gotta, the plan is so key to that. And I've seen people launch hardware products around Apple's announcements, and it's like, don't even bother with it. You're not going to get any PR.
Yeah.
So did this turn out to be any PRs, like bad PRs, good PR case, or was it just bad PR?
Bad PR. Well, it was ended up actually being a very successful event, like all in. Created a lot of like internal chaos beforehand.
Yep. Definitely. Yeah, I had an experience with that on social media. One of the social media teams said something for a client. I'm not going to go into it, but it was quite a PR nightmare. But we cleaned it all up and all that. But one of my great memories.
Yep.
So can you tell us about maybe some of the challenges for your company that you guys overcame, and especially in the early days? I know when you're first getting your product or service out there, and getting your first initial clients on board and all that. Anything that you learned?
Yeah, I think there's constantly challenges that as a startup you're running into day to day. So I think the most interesting one that I think most companies don't talk about very much is like, how do you get your first customers? And I think our first handful of customers, like there's no science to it. Like the way that we did it was a lot of like kind of just hand-to-hand combat. I was on LinkedIn, cold DMing people, and I did that very, very hyper personalized, leaning on like my experience as a product marketer and like how that related to the problems that we were solving. And like just ended up getting a couple of people who were game to give feedback, and like ended up becoming customers. And so I think a lot of people, like they start, we were talking about like paid earlier. It's like they start from the perspective of like, I need to immediately have a scalable acquisition channel for these early customers. And the reality is like you're much better off actually like doing it in a way that's not scalable at first like that.
That's a great point. Build it brick by brick, because those direct outreaches and conversations with customers help define the messaging and positioning and what works and what doesn't work with your service as you look to scale eventually. But putting in that work up front allows you to actually learn from these customers and have real conversations. And a lot of times, like there's so much of these conversations will tell you that some survey or looking at a bunch of data won't even just tell the story in of itself, but just having like a real like conversation with customers and seeing, what they're excited about, learning what their problems are, and, testing some potential solutions with them live and seeing what their reaction is will tell you so much more than, what simply data alone can tell you.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. So what are some of your favorite books that you've read this last year, or would recommend to people if they're looking to enhance their go-to-market strategy?
Oh man. I mean, one that I always recommend to folks is Made to Stick. I think like I've talked a bunch about like the importance of like getting your messaging right. I think Made to Stick is one of my favorite books when it comes to, articulating messages in creative ways. And it like really shifts the way that you think about like how you articulate value and how you can kind of laterally think about that. So, I'm a big fan of Made to Stick. I recently reread it again, and it kind of jumps out.
Yeah, I do that as well. Like there's like certain books that I just want to reread just so it's always top of mind.
Yeah.
That is a key thing. A lot of founders think like a particular feature that they love, everybody else loves, but it doesn't quite stick that way always.
Yep.
So what's one thing that a potential customer should know about Ignition, and why should they come to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think
when do they know that they need you guys to work with them?
Yeah, I think the right time to come work with us is like as soon as you actually start like concertedly shipping and launching new products or features, within your existing stack. And so, like we'll work with founders and product teams as early as them being like 2 people, and they're just trying to manage their road mapping process and extract insights from their, customer conversations that are happening. But, all the way up through like once they actually started putting a real concerted like launch and go-to-market process in place around bigger product launches. I think like the beauty of our platform is that, the earlier you end up coming into it, the more you're going to have like a real true central source of truth that ends up acting as like, a long-term repository of knowledge for your company. And, one of the cool things that we're shipping, in the next like week or two is we're actually contextualizing all of your workspace data with an underlying AI layer. So anybody can come in and freeform ask questions like, hey, how do I talk about, this product to this persona? We'll look across all your road mapping data, all your go-to-market documentation, and we'll spit out personalized messaging guides for them. So you can immediately like enable your sales team straight out of your core planning data.
Wow, that's really cool. So what's next over the next 5 years? I mean, you just mentioned those new great features that you have. Anything else, further down the line, or can you not reveal that information?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years is a long time in startup land. So I guess there's a lot that will be different. But I think in terms of like what our bigger vision is like, we want to be that platform where you can truly like end-to-end plan. You can collect all of your research, you can do all your planning across multiple different departments. And then you can actually create all of the content for your campaigns directly in Ignition, and then push them outwards to the customer-facing channels that you're going to use to execute those campaigns. So, end of the day, like we want to be that full end-to-end go-to-market process for you.
Great. Well, Derek, I really appreciate you coming on today. And anybody interested in Ignition, check it out today in the NachoNacho B2B SaaS marketplace, or go directly to the website. Is it ignition.com?
Haveignition.com.
Have Ignition. If you don't have it, then you're doing it wrong. So, Derek, once again, I really appreciate you coming on today, and looking forward to seeing your company grow. And I think it's a much needed service. So,
yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, bud. Take care.
Awesome. Take care.